Hey folks, good afternoon and welcome to this fourth installment of You Can See Me, But I Can't See You. We are a class, a 4-week class that is gathered under the auspices of the Earth and Spirit Center to talk about white fragility, that disorientation, that dislocation, that denial that sets in when white people like me come to grips with the privileges that we've experienced our entire lives and have been kind of oblivious to or in denial of. We want to move not just to guilt and shame, but to help move people through that to a place of recognizing we've been gifted, that life has been out of balance. What can we do with the gifts that we have to repair the damages that have been done to Black America at the advantage of white America? This class has been sponsored by the Earth and Spirit Center, and I want to encourage you to give to the Earth and Spirit Center to help support the work that we do. There'll be a way for you to do that later on, but I'm really pleased that our Executive Director, Kyle Kramer, is with us, and I want to invite him to say a few words right now.
Hey, Joe, and hello, everybody. Hi, Ricky. Jason and Parker. I'm not on to do fundraising for, in a strange change of events. I'm not actually here to ask for money. It looks like Joe already did that for me. No, I'm actually here in kind of a strange irony in some sense. We at the Earth and Spirit Center, we're the largest provider of mindfulness meditation instruction in the whole central US. So we're really known actually primarily for mindfulness and meditation instruction. We've been doing that for 15 years. And so normally I'm getting up in front of a class saying, hey, did you know we not only do meditation, but we're also committed deeply to social justice and compassion and care for the earth, because we think the only way we're going to thrive is by all of those pieces being in place, us having kind of internal equanimity and peace through contemplative spiritual practice, us having just communities and right relationships in the social and familial realms, and then likewise us having a healthy relationship with the planet itself. So normally I'm reminding folks that we do justice and earth care work. In this context, it's the opposite. You all have gathered around this wonderful but challenging set of questions and reflections around white fragility and racism more generally. And what I'd just like to remind you is, I know that you've been learning from Joe and Parker, that that work really needs a solid foundation. And we believe strongly that spiritual practices, particularly contemplative spiritual practices that help erase the distinctions between us and them, or soften that line that we're so sharp, we tend to draw so sharply, that those are important as well. So I just wanted to put that out there, that our mission is broad enough to include those other aspects. And we do have courses upcoming. We have a 10-week Meditation 1 course taught by our founder and president, Joe Mitchell, starts in mid-September. If you're not familiar with meditation or mindfulness, that is the flagship course taught by just an incredibly powerful teacher, Joe Mitchell. We have a 4-week version taught by Karen Newton. Basic mindfulness also begins in late September. And Parker himself, your co-host of this course, I'm sure he'll talk about this, but he's doing a 4-week meditation in action course later this fall. And you'll get emails about all these things. But one important follow-up for this class is that, and again, you'll hear more about this today and subsequently, but Joe Phelps and Joe Mitchell are teaming up once again to do a racial healing course, which is a follow-up of this one. It'll be an 8-week course starting this fall. We're trying to figure out whether that's going to be offered in the mornings from 10 to 11:30 or in the evenings 7 to 8:30. So maybe at some point today, Parker, you could ask that question in a chat and have folks give their preference, or another means to do that. But just want to let you all know, A, that we have a broad mission and we want to invite you to other parts of that mission. And B, if you have been engaged by what you've encountered here in this course, there are some wonderful ways to follow it up. And I'm just grateful for everybody gathering around this, and especially Joe Phelps, to you for your amazing work in this space. So I'll turn it back over to Joe, but I just want to thank all of you and hope to see you sometime again soon on Zoom until we can meet in person.
Thank you, Kyle. I'm going to lateral the ball to Parker.
Thank you for that. And thank you, Kyle. And welcome everyone for joining us again for this last session together. Before we dive into the conversation between Joe and Dr. Jones, I want to take a moment just for all of us to ground ourselves in our body and start to arrive into this space. So I'd like to invite you to either soften the gaze or close the eyes if that's more comfortable for you. Just begin to settle into whatever seat you're in this evening. Just noticing your feet resting on the earth below you. Feeling your left foot connecting to the ground, to your shoe. Feeling your right foot connecting to the ground below you. I'm taking a moment just to check in with the breath this evening. Maybe noticing the rise and fall of the belly or the chest, or the air coming in and out of the nostrils. Just resting your awareness on whatever sensation of the breath feels most grounding for you this evening. Noticing if you're carrying any tension or stress with you from the day. Seeing if you let that be there, or maybe release it if that feels possible. As you continue to feel the sensation of the feet connecting to the floor beneath you, grounding you. Feeling the breath coming in and out of the body on its own. Just beginning to open the eyes and return the gaze back to the screen as you feel ready. See if you can maintain that presence in the body as we move through this course together. And I did want to offer a quick note before we jump into the conversation. So this week's final session, as Joe mentioned, will be featuring Dr. Ricky Jones in conversation. And so we're hoping to actually have a lot more question and answer throughout this conversation, both for Joe and for Dr. Jones. And so as we've done in previous weeks, we'll be using the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So I'd like people just to invite you to start asking questions whenever they arise for you. If you have one now, feel free to put it in there. We'll get around to as many as we can. And you just keep putting them in there and we'll pause as we go. Yeah, I think that should be it, Joe. With that, I'll turn it over to y'all to get the conversation started.
Good. Jason, if you will, throw up that slide of the cartoon that my friend Andrew Spalding made for me. I hope it's on there somewhere. Yes, the cartoon of the young fish encountering the older fish in the water. The older fish asking, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And as they think about it, they ask, "What the hell is water?" White privilege is the water in which most of us who are watching swim. And as we swim and as we become aware of the water, and we are aware that the water that we're swimming in is privileged water, we can go lots of different directions with it. And I'm grateful for folks like you all who are listening to this discussion today, who are willing to engage and to hear and open your hearts and minds to other points of view. I thought it would be helpful to bring on a real live Black man to our mostly white conversation. And I couldn't think of anyone more meek and mild than Ricky Jones to introduce you to today. So it is my deep pleasure to introduce Dr. Ricky Jones to you. He is the professor and chair of the University of Louisville's Department of Pan-African Studies. He's an author. He has written a couple of books already, one called Black Haze, Violent Sacrifice and Manhood. I think there's a slide that shows that picture, Jason. And then the other one's called What's Wrong with Obama Mania. He's got a book coming out called Colin. I assume that's about Colin Kaepernick. Colin, Confederates and Con Artists, Essays on Race, Sports, and America. But beyond his books, he is a regular and prolific author in the Courier Journal and in Leo, where he is a consistent voice, a new and fresh voice to the Courier Journal. I'm so grateful. And then, if you're gangster enough, listen to the Ricky Jones Show on the Real 93.1 FM or on Louisville's iHeart Radio. He's the father of a beautiful young woman, and our paths crossed on various conferences and radio TV shows that needed a couple of loudmouths to come on and talk. Dr. Jones was always a man of deep courage and conviction and clarity. So welcome to this White Fragility class sponsored by the Earth and Spirit Center, Dr. Ricky Jones.
My dear brother, Reverend Phelps, what people don't know, our relationship is long, our relationship is strong. You're somebody that I have, great respect for, great love for. And, you've even served as my counselor, when I've had some things that I've needed to work through. So, today is my birthday, actually. And I think of no better way to spend it. Brother, I can think of no better way to spend it than having a few minutes with you. So thank you for inviting me.
Well, I can say unequivocally, I'm glad for the day that you were born, and I thank your mother and your family and all who nurtured you to be the man that you are. So, Doc,
it's a blessing.
What do you think? I'm just interested in your reaction to a mostly white organization offering a class on white fragility taught by a very white guy. What do you think of that?
I think it's encouraging. I think it is incredibly encouraging. When you look at the history of this country, actually, people sometimes make the argument that you can't talk about racism, or you can't talk about race, the legacy of slavery or slavery. You can't talk about justice just among white people, and white people have played no role in it. I think that there's a very bad tendency, a destructive tendency to dichotomize history. And as we look through the history of this country, some of my greatest heroes, people like John Brown, John Brown's one of my guys. John Brown said, of slavery, I have a system to destroy, and I have no time to waste. And while many in the dominant culture painted John Brown as a madman, here was a white brother who was fighting against something that did not individually affect him and his family. And in my mind, there is no greater dedication than dedication to something that is not necessarily negatively impacting you. And we've seen white brothers and sisters throughout American history function in this way, so that exists, that has always existed. Now, unfortunately, they have not been in the majority, but they have been there. And so I think we're at a moment right now where, internal to each race, we have to have people, the organic intellectuals, the people who are really committed to justice, committed to decency, committed to humanity, who are going within their own communities and having conversations where they can come to the table with a little bit more of that decency in them, a little bit more of that awareness in them, a little bit more of the examination of American history where, white privilege is rooted in a lie. It's rooted in many lies, actually. It's rooted in the idea of white man's burden. It's a lie. It's rooted in white superior intellect. That's a lie. It's rooted in the idea that God somehow tasked white people who civilize and spiritualize the rest of the world. All of these things are lies. And so if you are able to come together as white brothers and sisters and have honest, decent conversations about those things, I, for one, think it's great.
Yeah. So you don't feel, I don't sense in you frustration that we haven't gotten to this conversation sooner, or that you're sort of put out with white people because all of a sudden we're waking up and why didn't you get here sooner? Does that enter into your thinking at all?
Contrary to popular belief, you've known me for a very long time. And I think, well, I know, as you know, Ricky Jones, the person, versus Ricky Jones, the caricature that people quite often paint, the public figure, are very different human beings. You know, it's amazing how many people meet me and say, you're totally different than I thought you would be, because they've, you know, read my columns for years. And I appreciate them reading, and the columns are meant to be challenging. But for me, you know, there are a few things for me. My grandmother taught me, I think, two really great lessons among the many, but I think two apply to this. One, patience is incredibly important. You know, if you're patient, you tend not to make decisions nilly-willy. You know, you sit and you ruminate on things, you reflect on things, and you approach things with a much greater amount of depth and calm. And I think that's important. That's one. But two, my grandmother also told me, and she was a very religious woman. And people don't know this about me, but I'm a spiritual man. I have a deep belief in God. I believe God has tasked us with you know, individual missions, and he's given us gifts to accomplish those missions. And then it's up to us as to whether or not we'll embrace those. Now, I embrace believers, agnostics, and atheists. I see them all as brothers and sisters. So I'm just talking about me on that, what guides me. But that second lesson that my grandmother taught me was, we all need too much forgiveness not to grant it to others. So anybody, you know, use a sports analogy, whether they come into the game in the first quarter or at the end of the fourth, and they want to get on board and try to do the right thing, you know, I'm going to embrace them and try to do whatever I can to help. So is there frustration with white brothers and sisters who are now on board? No, not at all. You know, I sometimes wonder what exactly happened at this moment to bring us to this point of reflection, but I'm not so stuck in questioning that I turn away from this point and the possibilities that it presents. And I hope we don't get into, you know, retrenchment and shallow engagements that'll go away in a week or two or a month or two or even a year or two. So I think we have a chance to do something different to build a better world. So no frustration here.
That's good. That's good. I wonder, you talk about this window of opportunity here and how white fragility works to close that window of opportunity. What do you see? How does white fragility manifest itself in the issues that you tend to champion, or the causes that you raise for the world? How do you experience white people being fragile and defensive? What are their tactics? And I'm sure there are times when we're funny to you, but I'm sure there are times when we're annoying.
Well, they're funny a lot, actually.
Tell us, bro.
But I think Americans are funny, to tell you the truth, Reverend. I think that Americans have been, and I'm going to speak along the racial dichotomy right now of black and white. I won't go into the nuance, because black and white Americans have a very special relationship outside of the Native Americans, you know, who were eviscerated by some of the callousness that we saw at the outset of this country. What happened to Native Americans, the first world people, that's America's original sin. But the enslavement of Africans was the second sin of America. But, you know, whites and blacks have been here with one another for the longest. Everybody else is kind of, you know, latecomers. They're latecomers to the game. And it's created a very interesting relationship among black and white Americans. And so, but I think what we've seen, and to this day, we've seen a disturbing level of white callousness, and also a disturbing level of black cowardice, because of the dynamics that we've created in the country. Because white supremacy creates a dynamic, it creates a society where the people who have been the underlings, seen as the inferior race, can be punished for challenging any sub or superstructures that are dominating the country. But what it's done over a long period of time is it has numbed people to the reality of the inhumane environment that they have created, that we have really conspired to create along lines of race. Black people should have fought back more. You know, we certainly have some heroes, from, you know, Frederick Douglass to Harriet Tubman to William Monroe Trotter to Du Bois to King and others who have fought back, but there haven't been enough. Even now we see that. I think one reason why some Louisvillians are uneasy with me is they're not used to black people standing up and speaking their truth and speaking it, you know, courageously and loudly, and not being a shrinking violet and not bowing to the status quo. That's odd to them, but it's also odd to blacks, right? And so if we have generation upon generation upon generation of people living like that, they get to a point where they simply don't know what they're doing. They're numb to it. And so what happens with white fragility, if you live all your life in a pampered state and nobody is challenging the very destructive things that you not only do, but believe that lead to, you to consistently reify action upon action upon action, building layer upon layer upon layer of structures in the country that continue to benefit you. When you're challenged on that, you're like, but this is a lie. This is not the world that I know. And you're disturbing a person's truth. I would imagine that can be incredibly traumatic, right? That can be incredibly traumatic. And so I think white fragility is born of trauma. And I understand it. So I think that America has done a really nasty thing to a lot of white brothers and sisters. And so they're going through this cognitive dissonance, and I would imagine that it's very, very painful. And so they have to resort to holding on fiercely to that truth that they've been taught. Otherwise, it just blows up their world. And that is something that can put you into a very, very vulnerable place. And so while I think white fragility is dangerous, I think it is very, very understandable.
Yeah. One of the books that we're going to use for the class next semester is called Post-Traumatic Slavery Disorder. And I assume it's about Black Americans and the trauma they've experienced, but you just named white Americans and the trauma, the residual trauma that we're experiencing, which aren't equivalent, but they're part of the same whole.
Right.
And have to work together to get beyond.
They're different manifestations of the same historical and societal disease.
Right.
And so we'll get different symptoms, but it ties back to the same disease.
Exactly. Parker, let me invite you to jump in with questions if you've got any.
Yeah, I'm happy to. One thing, just to close the loop on that, both what you all are talking about, that trauma is yeah, it's real. And it's something I wanted to invite folks to explore further on. That is, there's a book called My Grandmother's Hands by Resma Minikim, who's a social worker and trauma therapist based out of Minneapolis. And he goes directly into exploring racial trauma and healing for both white bodies and bodies of color. So I will put that in the chat for folks who'd like to dive further into what Dr. Jones was just talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And one of the questions that came in, I know this is something that you all have both been involved in, so I thought it'd be good for us to discuss it here. Is that someone asked that they would like to hear your thoughts about the Urban League and the partners, the path forward for Louisville. So I'd like to hear what y'all agree with, what y'all think is missing in that path as it stands right now.
Dr. Jones.
Okay. First of all, let me say I think that the Urban League is doing wonderful work here. There are a number of organizations that are doing wonderful work, both Black and white, and have been doing wonderful work for a long time. What I worry about sometimes, Parker, to the questioner, whoever asked it, is people who think that they have a panacea plan, that one person or one organization can come up with something that is going to solve all of our racial problems, and you can find it in one document. I don't think the Urban League is capable of doing that. I don't think Pan-African Studies is capable of doing that. I don't think anybody or any organization is capable of doing that. If we have any people who are leaders of organizations who think that their plans are better than others, and they have some type of to end all plan that within the next week or two or year or two or even decade or two, because of what their thoughts are, is going to repair a system that's taken centuries to create and calcify, then I'm not bored with plans like that. So I think what the Urban League and other organizations have been doing is a good start. I think everybody needs to be open to participation from others, input from others, and then we build from there. So I don't think that the path forward or any other is an end. I think it's a beginning, and anybody who doesn't want to listen to input to build upon that beginning, I think that they're probably wrong-headed. So, but I think that it's a good start.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Dr. Jones, you'll recall that when the protest started downtown, I called you with my hair on fire saying, we need some kind of leadership. We need an answer, and you're the man. God has told me to tell you that you're the man. And you're like,
You did.
I don't have an easy answer in my file folder that says, oh, we've been waiting for this moment. Here's everything you need to know to fix 400 years of oppression and privilege to whites and disprivilege to blacks. It's just it. But I think what Sadiqa Reynolds and the Black leadership of Louisville has shown us is they do have a vision. They do have ideas of how to address the issues. They can only address the ones that are right in front of us first. But
Yeah.
it's a long-term systemic-ish challenge for us. So,
Well,
yeah.
you know, you and I had a number of conversations about this because I don't want anybody to leave feeling that I rejected leadership. You know,
No, right.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of folk, I want to, because I feel that I've been certainly serving, doing my best to serve for years. I'll continue to serve. I was not interested in trying to seize a moment of becoming some heroic figure who was seen as the titular head of some movement in Louisville or anywhere else to just write everything, because that's an overpromise. And so I wasn't trying to overpromise. And let me be clear. Yeah, and let me be clear. I'm not willing to follow anybody who sees themselves as a titular head who has all the answers, because I think they are overpromising.
Yeah.
I think that is a dangerous thing. And Reverend, you know that you and I have had, pretty extensive conversations, emotional conversations for me as I sat back, I reflected on things and prayed about things, talked to you and others that I care about. There's some things that worry me. I think sometimes in these conversations, we talked about the idea of economic essentialism that I push back against. And people say, well, what is economic essentialism? Where sometimes you'll get organizations who will come and everything that they talk about has a price tag to it. I think economic help, funding, financial resources are important, but they are necessary but not sufficient. And I think if we get into that, then we can have situations where a lot of Black organizations, 2 or 3 Black leaders who will really, really benefit, but that is not something that I see as sufficient to really dig into the problems that we deal with. We're dealing with economic problems, but we're dealing with problems of the spirit.
Yes.
Problems of the mind. We're dealing with problems of political systems and awareness. We're dealing with how our society is built and how we see one another. And you can't solve that just by throwing money at it. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm against economic needs. Like for instance, I think the Black kids should be able to attend college for free, right? That's an economic thing. I don't think it just fixes everything. And that's all. I mean, so I think, Reverend, you got caught. That I went to Morehouse College where Martin Luther King Jr. went to school, and Morehouse men, we're kind of homogenized. All of us have to take speech. So we all kind of dress alike, walk alike, talk alike. And so, people think that, hey, let's call it a Morehouse man. And I'm not tied to any particular organization. I'm not a fundraiser. I never ask people for money.
Right.
And so I think that gives some folk a feeling that there's a certain level of integrity where I'm concerned. And I believe I deliver that too. And let me say that in closing in this answer. For me, my independent brand is very important to me because it is a brand of honor. I do not lie to people. Honor and integrity, being truthful with folk, even if that truth is not something that they want to hear. I think hard truths are better than comfortable lies. And I think people gravitate toward that in a world where we are losing faith in American institutions, in the church, in political institutions, in our criminal justice system. We're losing faith in educational systems. We're losing faith in American institutions across the board and individuals who guide those institutions because we don't think they'll tell us the truth. And I'm very committed to that. And so love me or hate me, I think folk know that I'm going to be honest with them.
Yeah. Well, and to be clear, thank you for what you said, because to be clear, I was not being critical of you not stepping up. I was being critical of me.
I just want to be clear to some folks. Yeah.
The typical white guy response of, we got to fix this problem right now, today. Yeah. And it's not a one-day fix. Parker, let's go to question.
Yeah, thank you all for that. So the next question is something that's coming in a lot of different formats. We've seen this question come in different forms the past several weeks, and it always centers around folks wondering what else they can do. They're in this course, they're reading books. Some folks are going to demonstrations, but as someone put it in the thing that it's as a white grandma living in COVID quarantine, what the hell do I do right now?
Dr. Jones is here to tell you.
Learn. COVID, let me say this about COVID. And Reverend, when COVID first started, I wrote a piece in my Courier Journal USA Today column called The Coronavirus versus Capitalism. And I said that this is really going to be a war in America about us altering our way of life for a minute, literally to keep people alive, or continuing to do business as usual and us losing thousands upon thousands of people. The coronavirus is a terrible thing as the earth tries to adjust and replenish itself. I think Earth is the planet is fighting back against human beings in many ways right now. But I think the coronavirus gives us an opportunity too. It gives us an opportunity to sit still for a minute, to rest, to quiet our minds, to meditate as we did at the beginning of this session. And in sitting still, as we momentarily can release ourselves from the rat race of capitalism, if we have the means to do that, because God knows many people are being crushed underfoot by having to stop for a moment. But if you have the means to do it, I say quiet your mind. And if you're interested in this, the first thing that you can do is take time to read. I don't think there is a substitute. Read the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was so bad that he wrote two. I mean, now that you lived a hell of a life, you got to write two autobiographies.
That's true.
Read Du Bois's Souls of Black Folk and the Philadelphia Negro. If you can go back, read some of the old columns by Ida B. Wells when she's down in Memphis writing in the Free Speech. Read. That is the most important thing. Read Stokely Carmichael, Black Power, Stokely Carmichael before he became Kwame Ture. So it is incredibly important that we read. So I say to the grandmother, you're doing the same thing as I am, kind of holed up at home for the most part, because there are people who want to will COVID away, and you're seeing what's happening across the country. Last time I checked, which was yesterday, there are only 3 states in the country that are right now in decline with COVID. The rest of the states are holding a little bit stable, but in many places we're seeing increases in cases, and brothers and sisters across lines of race are dying. My advice to you is to read and connect with people. Find somebody in your community that you may have heard of who's doing this type of work. Shoot them an email. They'll probably respond to you because they've lived their lives with nobody listening to them. So they'd be happy to talk to the white grandmother sitting back because they're probably holed up too, and y'all can develop a friendship and learn. So I don't think there's any substitute for learning.
That's beautiful. Spoken like a true professor, of course. But I appreciate very much your encouragement to our audience to reach out to a Black friend that maybe they haven't in the past, and take that risk. Not every one of them is going to be open, but you think some of them will, and I think the risk is worth it. I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, and look, if you really look at the history of this country, we have an interesting dynamic where Black people are concerned. A white friend of mine said to me years ago, and he was laughing. We talk about white privilege a lot. And he said to me, he said, man, guys who look like me, when you really look at the things that have gone on, from mass shootings to slavery to everything else, guys who look like me, we're the most dangerous animals on the planet. He was talking about white men. He's like, but we've convinced people that guys who look like you are. But when you really look at the history of race relations in this country from space to space, and and in the face of atrocities, when you look at what happened in Carolina with Dylan Roof, where this man goes into a church and kills these Black parishioners. But you've seen this white terror throughout America historically. And when you learn about it, again, it is painful. It is painful when you look at the number of killings, mass killings that have happened in America that were motivated by race. But time and again, you see Black individuals and communities who are forgiving to a fault. And so I think most Black people, if you reach out to them, they're going to be forgiving and open as well. I mean, we're very forgiving people if you really strip it away. That's a part of the story that is rarely told in the main. Yeah.
Parker, you got a question? I want
Yeah,
to talk at some point about Breonna Taylor, of course, and David McAtee, and now Shelby Gasaway.
yeah, maybe we can, this question kind of follows up on what you were just talking about. Someone asked, what character strengths do you think Black folks have had to cultivate to cope/survive that whites have yet to develop, which makes us fragile? So I don't know if you want to, if that's something you see forgiveness as, or any other, so kind of taking the systemic down to the individual traits that Black folks embody.
Resilience. You know, that's a big one. And stress management. When you talk about the Black tax in America, it is to be under perennial stress in most spaces where you are. And I firmly,
the Black tax in America.
Yeah, there's a tax to being Black. You know, when we talk about, you know, we got to work twice as hard to get half as far. You know, I mean, and I see it at the University of Louisville, where I work all the time. And I'm sure if you talk to Black folk all over, from any corporation, school system, business, city government, politics, whatever, you'll see it. You know, we've had cases of incredibly talented Black people in this country, you know, throughout history, who have been so beaten down and not had their talents rewarded that they literally have lost their minds. You know, they've lost their minds. And I believe that stress, the stress of being Black, there have been some studies on this recently, in fact, not by Black medical professionals, but by white medical professionals, who say that the stress associated with being Black literally shortens our lifespans. You know, and so it is incredible stress. Now, I didn't really understand stress, Reverend. I don't know if we talked about this, but, you know, my grandmother raised me because when I was born, my mother was 15 years old. I didn't meet my father until I was 35 or so. He could have walked up and spat on me. I wouldn't have known who he was. And my grandmother raised me. So I was very, very close to my grandmother. And she died. She died from cancer in 2009. And I started to go through just incredible abdominal pain. You know, it got pretty out of control. She dies in June, and by October, I'm in the hospital, you know, of 2009. And the doctor tells me, you know, you're suffering from ulcers. And, you know, at the point, I'm thinking I'm indestructible. You know, he said, you have bacteria in your body from ulcers. And I'm like, well, what the hell causes that? He said, well, ulcers, you know. And he said, look, and I said, well, what causes ulcers? He said, in a word, stress. And I don't know everything that you're doing, but you need to slow down, or the logical end to this could be the end of your life. And so stress is real. Black people who manage the world, who move through the world effectively, they manage that stress, you know, and some don't manage it as well. You know, some don't manage it as well. But that's something that white people don't have to manage. And you see it show up in everything. Like you said, I'm fundamentally a teacher, and I'll be brief on this. You know, I'm a political scientist by training. You know, my PhD is in political philosophy, not Black studies. But I chose to go into Black studies when, you know, I took a job after graduate school. And I hear this, I've heard this over the years, where people argue, well, you teach Pan-African studies, you teach Black studies. Isn't that fundamentally racist because you call it Black studies? And I'm like, actually not.
Yeah.
That's the beauty and the insidiousness of whiteness. It's invisibility, but it's ever present. So when you go to the history department, they don't have to say, hey, this is white history. It is understood. You go to the psychology department, they don't have to qualify. They don't have to say, this is white psychology. It's understood. And so whites don't have to live with that same stress. We live in a country that is built for them. Systems are designed for them, and they don't have that same type of stress. So I think when you talk about fragility, I don't think whites, by and large, manage that stress as well as Blacks, because they simply don't have to. But you do see Black people making some really, really odd, destructive choices where they will abandon their identities to try to manage that stress just to get through. That's how you get a Clarence Thomas, a Candace Owens, a Ward Connerly, you know, people like that. They rather check out of it than not. A great read on that is James Weldon Johnson, you know, who wrote Lift Every Voice and Sing. Lift Every Voice and Sing. He wrote a book, and he wrote it anonymously back in around 1912. It's called The Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man. It's a very, very good read about a man who can pass. He's Black, but he can pass for white. And James Weldon Johnson goes through all of the intellectual, the mental and spiritual obstacles he goes through in choosing whether or not he is going to live his life as a black man or a white man. And, you know, that's a very good read if you can find a copy of that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I tried to shorten my answer so I can answer so we can get to more questions.
Well, I do want to, let me jump in and say another feature that it feels to me that Black America has, that you mentioned resilience, but you also earlier mentioned the deep spiritual underpinning that is part of you. That really a deep belief in the mystery of something that is for you and with you sustains you. And I feel like, at least in the Black churches I'm around, that feels very palpable and a very profound resource.
Yeah, it is a resource. And I want to speak to the chat for a second because Brother Kevin DeCosta wrote, excuse my exception, white people have to deal with the basic stresses of life as well. And I don't want anybody to misunderstand me. I'm not saying that white people don't have to deal with stress, but you don't have to deal with the stress of race, right? You don't have to deal with the stress of that being ever present in your life and everything that you do when you're constantly existing in white spaces and people see you as the other. See, that is the type of pushback that I'm talking about that is a representation of white fragility and a lack of understanding in and of itself. Whenever we talk about these things, certainly whenever I talk about these things, I'm not saying that all white people live in some type of Shangri-La. That's not the point. Some do, but all don't. In fact, most don't. There are a lot of suffering white people in the country because it is a capitalist country that disadvantages the majority of people economically across lines of race. But there have been many studies that show even when you control for class, Blacks still suffer through those stressors more. That's the point. That's really important. So now you talk about the Black church. The Black church is really important. Martin Delaney said this many years ago. He said, Black people are incredibly spiritual, incredibly religious. Sometimes I fear too much so, but it is understandable why they are. Most suffering people are more religious and more tied to their spiritual institutions than people who are not suffering. Why? Because the world is so hard for them. One of the things that helps to get them through is the idea that there must be something better once they pass from this place.
Yeah.
So this is why I find such intensely religious Black folk, you know, historically in this country, because literally being on earth for them was, and for many still is, an actual hell. And they feel that there has to be something after they are gone that is going to be better. Otherwise, they can't make any sense of life. Right. So that's why I think you see the Black church being so intensely important in Black communities to this day, even though it's losing a little bit of that importance.
Right. Parker, another question, please.
Yeah, well, I do want to just be cognizant of time. I know you wanted to dive into Breonna Taylor, David McAtee, other issues like that. I know we only have probably about 10, 12 minutes left before we want to wrap up. So if you have a question, or else I can pull one as well.
Yeah, pull one if you'd like, or I'd love to hear Dr. Jones's thoughts on where we are as a city in this moment, and what thoughts he has about kind of the intransigence of our mayor to act and do justice.
I think Louisville is to Kentucky as Atlanta, where I was born and raised, is to Georgia. I think Louisville is the progressive gem of Kentucky, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
Okay? Relatively speaking. My belief that Louisville is the progressive gem of Kentucky does not mean that Louisville is progressive. My belief is this, you know, being an outsider, and I have to acknowledge this. I grew up in an abnormal environment. You know, I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta's had a Black mayor, for instance, when you bring the mayor up. Atlanta's had a Black mayor since 1973. I do not remember a time when we did not have a Black mayor.
Wow, that's
Atlanta. Right? I mean, so I grew up in a world where I did not go to school with a white kid until I was in 8th grade. So I grew up in a Black world. And even though, you know, we were very, very poor, I didn't grow up with a sense of Black inferiority because I saw Black people in power. Here's what I think about Louisville. And since we're talking about Louisville specifically, I think there has been a racial deal in Kentucky that stood for a very long time. There's been a racial deal between blacks and whites. And a Louisvillian told me this when I moved here. He said, you know, during slavery, Kentucky had slavery, but it wasn't seen by the people in Kentucky as vicious as the slavery in Alabama or Mississippi or Georgia. And so slave owners would say to blacks if they complained to the slaves, well, if you think it's bad here, we'll go down the river and it'll really be bad. So the blacks felt like, okay, we got it bad, but it could be worse. And so it created a type of mental pacification with them, you know, and accepted inferior status for them, where they didn't want to make any demands because they thought what little bit they had could be taken away. And Kentucky is still pretty native. Most of the people in Kentucky are from Kentucky, you know, so generation after generation after generation has continued to calcify that deal. So you have white parents to teach their white children certain things, and black parents who taught their black children certain things. And I think that is still around in this city for the most part. Blacks here, for the most part, who are from here, may make a demand here and there, but they're only gonna go so far because they're afraid. I have never, and look, I left Atlanta, I went to prep school in Rhode Island, I went to college for a few years in Maryland. America is America. I'm not saying Kentucky is worse than anywhere else, but in many ways it's more odd racially. And so because of that deal, even the blacks, black natives here, if there's a black person from outside of Louisville or from outside of Kentucky who comes in and says, hey, this is crazy, the blacks will ostracize them. You know, not all, but many. They'll see, you know, us as outsiders, as crazy people somehow because we see something is wrong. So I guess I could sum it up like this, Reverend, on where I see Louisville right now. It's the story of if a man is sitting in a room, in a dark room, and somebody else is in the room and they're feeding him worms, but they're telling him it's spaghetti. And you turn on the light and you tell the man who's been fed the worms, hey, he's giving you worms, not spaghetti. You would expect that person to partner with you to resist the person who is giving them the worms and lying to them. Instead, they'll say, turn that damn light off. The one who's being given the worms will say, turn that damn light off. So when we talk about what's going on with the mayor, I think the mayor, and I know Greg, got love for Greg, known for years, and I'm not saying he is not well-intentioned, but I think he's completely off balance. I think this is a moment that he does not know how to deal with, because it is a moment that is demanding transparency. It is a moment that is demanding fierce, dedicated, and brave leadership. It is a moment that is demanding you move away from political talking points and you engage with people honestly. It's a moment that's demanding people make hard decisions that are just decisions, not just kicking the can down the road and taking the easiest path. And he is not prepared for that right now. You know, now, I'm not saying he cannot adjust, but there are people around him, I believe, who are still giving him political advice that is calculated, you know, that is not really meant to make any change, but give the idea or illusion of change. And folks just aren't accepting that right now. So Louisville and Kentucky are at a moment right now, just as America is, but this is where we are. We're at a moment right now where this city has to decide what it wants to be. And this state has to decide what it wants to be. Do people want this to continue to be a basically white ethno state rooted in mid 20th century, you know, sensibilities? Or do you want to come into the 21st century? And that is not something that I can force Louisville to do or force Kentucky to do, because we know all the hoopla around, you know, my fraternity brother, Charles Booker. Come November, Kentuckians are going to go out. They are going to reelect Mitch McConnell by probably 8 to 10 points. They are going to be the first state called for Donald Trump by a lot. And so the question for me as a black man to you is, what does that say? Now, I know what that says to me as a black person, right? But what does it say to you all as people want to push back? Because it says something. And, you know, for me, again, I'm not a native. My daughter was born here, but she understands. My daughter's going into 7th grade. And she understands right now. This is a reveal. When she leaves high school, now right now, her mother and I are not married, but we have a great co-parenting relationship, and both of us have careers here right now. But when our daughter graduates, it is understood. My daughter will not attend school in this state. She must leave. And when she leaves, so will I. You know, unless something really, really changes about the direction of the state and of the city. Yeah. So where are we right now? I don't know if that doesn't sound very hopeful, Reverend, but there is no historical evidence that Louisville can really make a pivot to do something that is real and sustainable, you know, and substantive. And I hope we see that happen, but it hasn't happened to date.
That's right. Hope springs eternal, but it doesn't seem likely that we're going to get a sharp turn from our mayor. So,
well, you know, and look, I'm conflicted about Greg, you know, Mayor Fisher, because I know him and I really, really like him. You know, I like him a lot. I'm one that is really hesitant to throw people on the scrap heap of humanity. But his approach thus far has left a lot to be desired.
Yeah. Parker, you want to field a question?
Yeah, sure. Also, thank you, Dr. Jones, for that. The image of the person eating the worms with the lights. I don't think I'll ever forget that. That's a fresh way to look at this.
Yeah, it's not mine. It was told to me by
okay, I thought you came off that off the cuff. I was like,
no, I didn't come up with that. No. I don't want to plagiarize.
Well, thank you for sharing it either way. And I thought we could end, I'm just trying to be cognizant of time, with the last kind of question that folks have been coming up with the past couple of weeks. And someone was saying, you know, reading White Fragility and Robin DiAngelo's statement in it that she believes it's impossible to have a positive white identity. So folks are like, what do I do with that? I'm white, and White Fragility, you know, this concept we're exploring says I have to acknowledge that I'm white and explore my whiteness. And at the same time, it can't be positive. It is still superficial in a structural way. So how do people explore their identity in that case?
I disagree with that theory. I disagree with the theory that it's not possible to have a positive white identity. You know, for whatever reason, God made us what we are.
That's
you
right.
know, and being white, to my thinking, is not a curse. Just like being black is not a curse, as some people have tried to interpret the Noah, Ham, Shem, Japheth story.
Right.
That's why I don't believe in the theory that, you know, when people say, well, I don't see color, I don't see race. You know, one, we need to have genetic diversification for the survival of the species. That's one thing. And I see race. Look, I love Joe Phelps. And whenever we sit down across from one another, and we were just sitting down across from one another a few weeks ago, I think we were properly socially distanced. I don't know, but I love the man so much. Whenever I see him, we're going to hug each other. So if one gets COVID, the other's going to have COVID. I know that's terrible.
That's right.
That's a terrible word. Any white person who I love, and there are white people that I love, you know, I see that he's a white man, right, Reverend?
I am, brother. I'm pretty white.
I see that he's white. He can see that I'm black. And so it's not that we have to nullify our race. It's just that I can see him say, I'm no better than you because you white, right? And you're no better than me. We acknowledge that. So the whole theory that you can't have a positive white identity, I don't agree with that theory from White Fragility, but that's what academics do. We fight back and forth. A person can acknowledge they're white and still be a very positive, humane human being, working to build a better world and wipe out, you know, white supremacy. That's really what we're fighting against. We're not fighting against whiteness. We're fighting against white supremacy. And people can't confuse that, you know, because some people out here, well, I just hate white people. No, you need to hate white supremacy, because let me tell you something. There's some white people who hate white supremacy too. And there's some white, because somebody asked in the chat, are you saying that there's some black people in Mayor Fisher's circle who are too timid? There's some white people giving him bad advice, and yes, there have been and are some black people in his circle that are too timid. Let me be clear about that. So, you know, it's a terrible thing when Black people say, we just need a seat at the table. No, 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 you don't. No, you don't. If you're putting a Black person at the table and that Black person is saying the same thing that all the white people have been saying at the table before they got there, what good are you? I'd rather have a Joe Phelps with me any day of the week and twice on Sunday than Clarence Thomas if I'm talking about racial justice. I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? So this idea of purely racialized politics do not work if you have people who have no sense of racial identity, justice, or courage. I could talk about that all night, but let me close it.
That's good. That's good. Well, and I think
don't feel bad about being white is my point.
Thank you. And I think Robin DiAngelo kind of contradicts herself in that she says it's not, you know, where you find yourself, it's what you do with it now. What are you going to do with whiteness, you know? And to me, that's the story of redemption. How are you going to take what you've been given, even if you've messed it up, how are you going to redeem it and use it for the work of love?
Yeah. And let me say before we close, because I think this is so incredibly important to say, this idea that no white people have struggled against this, and all of them have, you know, just basked in white privilege and not realizing that's another lie. You know, we don't have to swing the pendulum all the way to the other side to speak the truth about injustice and then, you know, stereotype all white people, because it's just not true. There's some white people out there that go hard. You know, I told one of my white friends, we were in San Francisco together at a panel, and I was like, damn, man, don't you think you're too hard on white people? And he was like, no, I'm not hard enough. I mean, there's a white guy saying this. And so I think if we got to get beyond that. That's why you got to get to know people as individuals, because look, man, there's some soldiers out there who have lighter skin. So I got more love for them than I do the Black sellouts who are just engaged in vulgar careerism and greed and cowardice and will sell their mother to make another dime. That's my thought.
Parker, do you want to thank you, Dr. Jones, my dear friend, for being with this group? There are lots of other questions. I don't know how we can possibly address them, but tell us about tell us about your radio show and invite people there.
Oh, yeah. The Ricky Jones Show is an iHeart Media Productions, 4 years running, man. Actually won best radio show from Louisville Magazine a few years ago. You know, I always say the tagline is we talk about uncomfortable things that most people won't in ways they can't. You know, I have a PhD, but I'm also a kid who grew up in the housing projects. Yeah. I'm a professor, but I also love sports. You know, so we talk about society, race, and history. And so my thought is that we can educate while we entertain, listen to good music. So if you can go to Ricky L. Jones, that's RCKY, no E, RickyLJones.com, and you'll find a link to all the shows. There's an archive of every show that's ever been made. And you can also listen on Sunday mornings to the original broadcast at 10 o'clock. If you're here in the city, it's on 93.1 FM, and all over the world, you just go to the iHeartRadio app and you can listen to it there. You miss anything, just catch the podcast. So it's something that I really, really enjoy doing. And so hopefully people will join in. And you know, I do get notes and you know, white friends will approach me on the street and say, hey, I'm on the mothership every Sunday with you. And I was like, hey, brother, I appreciate it. So yeah.
That's good. Dr. Jones, I can't thank you enough. I want to say in front of everyone that I owe you a bottle of Kentucky's Finest as a gift of love to you for this. But seriously, thank you.
Yes, you do.
And I want to encourage those who are listening, if you want to continue the conversation with us this fall, we would be honored to have you in our class on racial healing. So I'm going to turn it over to Parker. Oh, and as someone just noted, happy birthday.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thank you all. I'm now 95 years old. So, you know, I know a lot of people want to say they're younger than they are. I tell people I'm older than I am. So they go, God, you look great. I'm like, yeah, I'm 95 years old today. So I appreciate it, Reverend. Hey, man, I love you. I'll see you next time.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. Take it easy, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Parker, any closing
one
words?
One last closing thing for folks who want to keep the conversation going after these 4 weeks. So we will, I can send out a link in the chat, and we'll be sending out an email in the next couple of days with information about the classes we're having. But we're also going to be facilitating peer-led discussion groups that folks in this class will be able to gather on their own, continue this conversation online, socially distanced. And the way it'll work out, you'll see on the forum, we're looking for peer facilitators. So people who want to gather folks online, and we'll send out discussion questions. We'll send out ways to connect on technology. So you don't need to be an expert. You don't need to teach anything. Basically, just bring this space to another group of folks. So I'll send that link out now. And we're asking folks, if you're interested, please fill that out by next Monday. And we'll be sending out emails to group people in the next few weeks. With that, Joe, any final words before we wrap up?
Thank you so much for your time. And I hope this has been some help to you. Peace to you all as you move forward in life.
Thank you all so much. And we hope to see you all again at another Earth and Spirit Center class or community conversation. Thank you all.